Hey guys, tonight you're not conquering the world, you're inheriting it. You are stepping into the silk-lined boots of a Mongol ruler in China. Let's quietly wander into the surprisingly calm and occasionally bureaucratic world of the Yuan Dynasty. You wake up in a land that was not always yours. The year is 1260. The dust of conquest still hangs in the air, though here in northern China it has begun to settle into something softer: administration. You are Kublai Khan, not just the grandson of Genghis Khan, not merely a nomadic horseman from the Mongolian steppe. You are now something new, something unusual, a Mongol ruler of China. And that is far more complicated than it sounds. You stand in a palace that once belonged to the Yuan Dynasty. The walls are not felt tents, they are brick and timber. The roof curves upward like the wings of a resting bird. Incense burns, officials bow deeply, very deeply, and you are still adjusting to that. Back on the steppe, authority was simple: loyalty, strength, horses, open sky. Here, power comes with paperwork. You have inherited a conquered North China after decades of war. The Yuan Dynasty fell in 1234 under your family's campaigns, but the south remains under the Song Dynasty, wealthy, stubborn, and technologically advanced. Your older brother, Mongol Khan, had ruled the Mongol Empire before you. After his death in 1259 during a campaign against the Song, the empire did what large empires often do when leadership is uncertain. It argued. You and your brother Erik Bokeh both claimed the title of Great Khan. A civil war followed. It was not the sort of disagreement settled over tea. From 1260 to 1264, you fought for legitimacy. Not just military victory, legitimacy. Because Mongol rule required recognition from princes across a vast empire stretching from Korea to Hungary. Eventually, you won. Erik Bokeh surrendered. You became Great Khan. But here is the quiet twist. Although you technically ruled the largest land empire in history, the Western Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, began acting independently. The Mongol Empire was fragmenting. So you did something bold. You leaned into China. Instead of ruling as a distant steppe overlord, you decided to become a Chinese emperor. In 1271, you proclaimed a new dynasty, the Yuan. The name came from the I Ching, the Book of Changes. It means origin or great beginning. You chose it carefully. You wanted legitimacy in the eyes of Confucian scholars. You wanted heaven's mandate. Because in China, conquest alone is not enough. Heaven must approve. You moved your capital to Dadu, present-day Beijing. The city was redesigned according to Chinese imperial principles: symmetrical layout, walls, gates, administrative quarters. You still loved the steppe. You kept the summer capital as Chengdu, Sanadu, where grasslands stretched wide and horses felt more at home than ministers. But Dadu was the center of your new world. You are now presiding over a civilization that has paper money, gunpowder, printing presses, and the population that vastly outnumbers your Mongol followers. And here is where things get interesting. You cannot simply absorb into Chinese culture. If you do, your Mongol identity, your military elite, may dissolve. But if you reject Chinese systems entirely, you cannot govern effectively. So you attempt a balance. You establish a social hierarchy. At the top, Mongols. Below them, Semu, Central and West Asians, many of whom serve as administrators. Below them, Northern Chinese. At the bottom, Southern Chinese, recently conquered and still seen as less trustworthy. It is not a subtle system. It is also not especially popular. But from your perspective, it keeps power concentrated where you want it. You retain Mongol military structures. You favor foreign administrators, Persians, Muslims, Central Asians, because they are less embedded in Chinese elite networks. You reopen and expand trade routes across Eurasia. Under your rule, the Silk Road becomes safer than it has been in generations. Merchants travel from Venice to Beijing. One of them, years later, will be a young Venetian named Marco Polo. He will serve in your administration, or at least claim to, and later describe your empire to Europe in astonishing detail. Whether every detail is true is another matter. But the fact remains, your court becomes cosmopolitan. Buddhists, Taoists, Muslims, Nestorian Christians all find a place in your capital. You personally favor Tibetan Buddhism. You appoint a Tibetan Lama, Pakfa, as imperial prefector. You even commission a new script, the Pakspa script, intended to unify languages across the empire. It doesn't quite catch on. Still, you try. You expand infrastructure. The Grand Canal is repaired and extended so that grain from the fertile south can feed the northern capital. Massive shipments of rice travel north each year. Without them, Dadu would starve. You build granaries, you sponsor arts, you patronize drama. Yuan theater flourishes, giving rise to some of China's most enduring plays. Yet, for all this refinement, conquest continues. The Southern Song remains, and they are not easy to defeat. The Song dynasty possesses a formidable navy, perhaps the most advanced in the world at the time. They use gunpowder weapons, they control river systems. So you adapt. You build fleets. Yes, Mongols, traditionally horse archers of the steppe, are now constructing naval armadas. History can be ironic. By 1276, your forces capture the Song capital, Hangzhou. The child emperor is taken. Loyalists flee south with another prince. The final confrontation comes in 1279 at the Battle of Yamen. You can imagine it. Ships locked together, fire arrows, drums, chaos on water instead of open grassland. The Song fleet is defeated. The last loyal official, according to tradition, jumps into the sea holding the child emperor rather than surrender. And just like that, for the first time in history, all of China is ruled by a non-Han dynasty. You have done what many thought impossible. You are not merely a conqueror. You are now the son of heaven. But ruling China is different from conquering it. Tax systems must function, floods must be managed, scholars must be placated, famines must be prevented. The mandate of heaven is conditional. Natural disasters, they may be seen as heaven's warning. Corruption, also your fault. You begin to feel the weight of administration, because when you conquer the world, you inherit its problems. And so, as you sit in Dadu's grand palace, listening to ministers debate grain transport quotas, you may occasionally long for the simplicity of the steppe wind. But you have chosen this path. You are Kublai Khan, founder of the Yuan Dynasty, and the world you rule is vast, interconnected, experimental, and slightly fragile. Tonight, you rest knowing you have transformed from nomadic warlord to emperor of China. But the story of the Yuan is only beginning, and as you slowly drift deeper into this empire, you'll discover that governing a settled civilization requires skills very different from riding at the head of an army. You wake before dawn, though technically you do not need to. An emperor could sleep longer. But governing China is not something you do lazily. You sit upright in a palace chamber in Dadu, wrapped in silk robes that still feel slightly unfamiliar compared to wool and leather. Outside, officials are already lining up. They carry scrolls. Always scrolls. You conquered China with cavalry and strategy. Now you must manage it with ink and paper. Welcome to administration. The Yuan government you oversee is, in many ways, inherited. China already had a sophisticated bureaucratic system long before you arrived. The Tang and Song dynasties perfected civil administration through ministries, provinces, tax registers, and an examination system based on Confucian classics. You could have dismantled it, but that would be impractical. China's population is enormous, tens of millions of people. You and your fellow Mongols are a tiny minority ruling over a vast, settled civilization. If you removed the bureaucratic skeleton, the body would collapse. So, instead, you adapt it. At the center of your rule is the Secretariat, the Zongshu Sang. This becomes the core administrative body of the Yuan Dynasty. It handles policy, taxation, appointments, and communication across the empire. If you imagine yourself seated on the throne, the Secretariat is the machinery quietly humming behind you. Then there is the Censorate, officials tasked with monitoring corruption and misconduct. They can investigate other officials. They can report problems directly to the throne. It sounds admirable. It also means you receive frequent complaints. And then there are the provinces. Here is something important. Under your rule, the Yuan dynasty formalizes a provincial system that will influence Chinese governance for centuries. Instead of loosely connected territories, you divide the empire into large provinces governed by appointed administrators. These provincial secretariats report back to the central government. In theory, this creates order. In practice, it creates paperwork. Now, here is where things become delicate. You do not entirely trust the traditional Chinese elite. Not because they are incapable. Quite the opposite. They are extremely capable. They have centuries of experience running an empire. That is precisely why you are cautious. So you design a hierarchy. At the top of society, Mongols. Below them, Semu, non-Chinese Central and West Asians. Many are Muslim administrators, tax specialists, and merchants. Below them, Northern Chinese, who had lived under earlier non-Han dynasties like the Jin. At the bottom, Southern Chinese, former subjects of the Song. This hierarchy influences government appointments. Mongols hold the highest military and key administrative posts. Semu officials often handle finance and taxation. Chinese scholars still serve, but their influence is limited compared to previous dynasties. You are walking a careful line. You need Chinese expertise, but you do not want Chinese dominance. So you adjust the civil service exams. For long stretches of your reign, the traditional Confucian exams are suspended or limited. Later, they are restored, but with quotas. Positions are allocated by ethnic category. It's not a meritocracy in the pure Song dynasty sense. It's a political balancing act. Now, imagine yourself reviewing reports from across your empire. From Yunnan in the southwest, newly incorporated territory sent updates about local tribal leaders. From Korea, the Goryeo kingdom continues as a vassal state, sending tributes and royal hostages tied by marriage to your court. From Tibet, Buddhist clerics maintain a special relationship with your throne. And then there are the far western regions, parts of Central Asia still culturally tied to the broader Mongol world. You are not simply ruling China. You are at the center of a Eurasian network. The YAM system, the Mongol Relay Postal Network, continues under your reign. Stations are spaced across the empire. Fresh horses wait at each stop. Official messengers can travel vast distances with remarkable speed. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the hoofbeats. Information moves faster under Mongol rule than it has in generations. This matters because your empire depends on coordination. Taxation, for example, is complicated. China traditionally collected taxes in grain, cloth, and labor service. Under your rule, taxation continues but is sometimes farmed out to private contractors, many of them semu-administrators. Tax farming can increase efficiency. It can also increase resentment. Some contractors extract more than required, skimming profits. Complaints rise. Corruption becomes a persistent issue. You attempt reforms periodically. You dismiss officials. You issue edicts. But the scale of the empire makes perfect control impossible. Meanwhile, you experiment with paper money. China had used paper currency before, but under the yuan, its use expands dramatically. The government issues chow, paper notes backed at least in theory by precious metals. At first, this works well. Paper is lighter than copper coins. Trade flourishes. But printing too much money is a temptation for any government. And inflation, though gradual at first, becomes a quiet problem. You likely do not notice it immediately. Prices rise slowly. Confidence shifts subtly. Empires rarely collapse from a single bad decision. They erode through accumulated strain. Still, in your lifetime, the system functions well enough. The Grand Canal ensures grain transport from the fertile Yangtze Delta to the northern capital. Massive grain fleets move north each year. Without them, Dadu would struggle to survive. You invest heavily in infrastructure. Roads are maintained, bridges repaired, storehouses built. You also oversee legal pluralism. Different ethnic groups within your empire are sometimes governed by different legal codes. Mongols may be judged under Mongol customary law. Chinese subjects under traditional statutes. It's not equality in the modern sense. It's layered governance. You may not call it that. You simply call it practical. Now imagine yourself in court sessions. Chinese Confucian officials kneel and present memorials citing ancient precedents from the Zhou dynasty. They argue for moral governance, benevolence, and ritual propriety. Meanwhile, Mongol nobles emphasize loyalty, military strength, and personal bonds. You sit between worlds. You patronize Chinese arts and scholarship. You support theater and literature. Yet, you also maintain Mongol traditions, hunting expeditions, steppe rituals, seasonal migrations to Shangdu. You do not fully become Chinese. You do not fully remain steppe. You are something hybrid. And that hybridity defines the Yuan state. From the outside, your dynasty looks stable. Trade routes are open. Foreign merchants arrive. Persian astronomers serve at court. Venetian travelers marvel at your wealth. But beneath the surface, tensions persist. Chinese elites feel sidelined. Mongol aristocrats resist sinicization. Financial pressures simmer. Natural disasters, floods of the Yellow River, droughts, test the mandate of heaven. And always, the question lingers. Can a small conquering minority permanently rule a vast, culturally confident civilization? For now, the answer appears to be yes. Because you are strong, because your authority is unquestioned, because prosperity, though imperfect, exists. But governance is not only about structure, it's about succession. And as you grow older, as the weight of years presses down, the stability of your carefully balanced system will depend on those who come after you. For tonight, though, you can rest in your palace in Dadu. The ministries are functioning, the provinces are reporting, the grain fleets are moving. The empire is, at least outwardly, calm. You have transformed a conquest into a dynasty. And as you drift toward sleep, surrounded by scrolls and silk and the faint smell of ink, you might almost forget that empires, even vast glittering ones, are living things. They require constant tending. The goal is to lull the listener as if telling bedtime story. You do not immediately realize it, but under your rule, the center of gravity in the known world shifts slightly eastward. If you stand in Dadu and imagine lines stretching outward in every direction, those lines reach farther than most emperors could ever dream. They run west across the steppes into Central Asia, through Persia, into the eastern Mediterranean. They run south toward Vietnam and Burma. They cross the sea to Japan. They reach Korea. They reach Tibet. And for a brief period in history, most of those routes are safer than they have ever been. This stability has a name modern historians use, the Pax Mongolica. You did not invent the phrase, but you created the conditions. Because the Mongol Empire, though politically fragmented into different khanates, still shares diplomatic ties, family connections, and trade agreements. Caravans can travel from the Yuan court to the Ilkhanate in Persia with relatively predictable protection. Merchants carry silk, porcelain, spices, precious stones, carpets, medicines, and ideas. You are ruling during one of the most globally connected eras of the medieval world. And it is not just goods that move, it is people. Muslim astronomers arrive at your court and introduce improved calendar calculations. Persian administrators bring sophisticated financial techniques. Central Asian engineers contribute to military technologies. Artisans from the Islamic world influence Chinese ceramics with cobalt blue designs that will later become iconic Ming porcelain. When you walk through the markets of Dadu, you do not hear only Chinese and Mongolian. You hear Persian, Turkic dialects, Arabic, perhaps even fragments of Latin. You encourage this movement, partly because it strengthens trade, and partly because you trust foreigners more than entrenched Chinese elites. Outsiders depend on you for status. That makes them loyal. It also makes your capital unusually diverse. Religion reflects this diversity. Unlike many rulers before or after you are not interested in enforcing a single spiritual orthodoxy. The Mongol tradition, shaped on the steppe, has long been religiously flexible. Shamanism exists alongside Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Taoism. You personally favor Tibetan Buddhism. The relationship between the Yuan court and Tibetan lamas becomes formalized. The Sakya school gains prominence, and Tibetan leaders hold both religious and political influence under your patronage. But you do not suppress others. Muslim communities thrive in Yuan cities. They serve as merchants, administrators, and astronomers. Mosques operate openly. Islamic law governs internal community matters in many places. Nestorian Christians, present in Asia long before European missionaries arrive, maintain churches. Taoist priests continue their rituals. Confucian temples remain active, though Confucian scholars sometimes grumble about their reduced influence in government. You preside over a multi-religious empire without launching crusades or inquisitions. This does not mean there are no tensions. There are disputes between Buddhist and Taoist communities. At one point, you convened debates to determine religious legitimacy. The Buddhists emerged politically strengthened. Still, compared to many regions of the medieval world, your empire practices notable tolerance. And then there are the travelers. One of them becomes famous centuries later, Marco Polo. He likely arrives at your court in the 1270s, accompanied by his father and uncle. They are Venetian merchants. They travel along trade routes that your empire helped secure. In his later account, Marco Polo describes your wealth, your administrative system, your paper currency, your vast hunting preserves, and the grandeur of Dadu. He claims to have served in administrative roles, possibly as a special envoy. Modern historians debate the accuracy of his narrative. Some details are exaggerated, some are confirmed by Chinese sources. Whether he held high office or simply observed carefully, his account shapes Europe's image of Asia for centuries. But he is only one traveler among many. Rabban Bar Sauma, a Nestorian Christian monk from China, travels west to the Ilkhanate and even to Europe as a diplomatic envoy. Persian historians write about your court. Muslim geographers describe trade networks that stretch across your domain. You are, whether you intend it to be or not, facilitating globalization on a medieval scale. Trade expands dramatically under your rule. Silk remains valuable, but porcelain becomes equally important. Chinese ceramics travel westward in large quantities. In exchange, horses, precious metals, glassware, and luxury textiles move east. You did not grow up on the sea, yet now your empire depends heavily on maritime commerce. The southern Chinese shipbuilding industry, inherited by the Song Dynasty, remains advanced. Large ocean-going junks carry impressive cargo loads. Navigation improves through compass use and detailed maritime knowledge accumulated over generations. All of this generates revenue. Customs taxes contribute to the state treasury. Trade enriches merchant communities. Urban centers grow more vibrant. But prosperity brings complexity. The circulation of paper currency increases to accommodate expanding commerce. At first, confidence remains high. The government requires taxes to be paid in paper currency, reinforcing its legitimacy. Over time, however, excessive printing begins to strain that confidence. You may not see the long-term consequences yet. For now, markets are busy. Caravans continue moving. Diplomacy extends beyond trade. You attempt to expand Mongol influence further. Envoys are sent to Japan demanding submission. The Japanese refuse. In 1274 and again in 1281, massive invasion fleets are launched. The first invasion meets resistance and storms. The second is even larger, an enormous logistical undertaking combining forces from South Korea and southern China. And then the typhoons come. Japanese chroniclers later call them kamikaze, divine winds. The fleets are destroyed. It is a rare and costly failure. You also attempt campaigns in Vietnam, Burma, and Java. Some yield temporary submission, others drain resources. Conquest, you begin to discover, is easier on horseback across open plains than across oceans or into tropical jungles. Yet despite these setbacks, your empire remains formidable. Dadu stands as one of the largest cities in the world. Foreign envoys attend your court. Merchants describe your reign as stable and profitable. You have created something unique, a Mongol-led Chinese dynasty integrated into a Eurasian system of exchange. And here is the subtle irony. The Mongols began as nomadic pastoralists on the steppe, valuing mobility above all else. Now, under your leadership, they preside over one of the most urbanized and economically sophisticated societies on Earth. Your people once measured wealth in horses and livestock. Now, your treasury counts paper notes and customs revenue. You may still ride in grand hunts across northern plains, but your empire's strength increasingly depends on farmers in the Yangtze Delta, shipbuilders in Fujian, and merchants crossing deserts with caravans. It's a transformation no one in Genghis Khan's generation could have fully predicted. And it's fragile. Because global connection is powerful, but it also spreads more than silk and porcelain. It spreads ideas. It spreads technologies, and, occasionally, it spreads disease. For now, though, trade thrives. Religions coexist. Foreigners walk the streets of your capital. You sit at the center of a web stretching across continents, ruling a dynasty that, for a time, makes China the most cosmopolitan realm in the medieval world. And you are only midway through the Yuan story. You might think that after unifying China in 1279, your work would slow down. It does not. In fact, ruling a settled empire seems to awaken an old instinct in you, the instinct to expand. You're still a Mongol ruler, after all, and the memory of your grandfather, Genghis Khan, lingers like wind over open grassland. Expansion is not merely ambition. It is tradition. And so, even as officials in Daidu debate tax quotas and grain shipments, your attention drifts outward, toward islands, jungles, and kingdoms that have not yet submitted. Japan is first. You send envoys in 1268 demanding that the Japanese recognize your authority and become a tributary state. The message is clear: submit peacefully or face consequences. This formula has worked before. Many states across Eurasia accepted Mongol overlordship to avoid devastation. Japan does not respond the way you expect. The Kamakura shogunate ignores your letters. Some envoys are dismissed. Later, others are executed. This is not the usual pattern of reluctant compliance. It is outright refusal. So you prepare for invasion. In 1274, your forces assemble a fleet composed largely of Korean ships and troops, alongside Mongol and Chinese soldiers. The logistics alone are staggering. You are coordinating thousands of men across sea routes that your ancestors never needed to master. You are a ruler of horse archers. Now you must become a ruler of fleets. The invasion force lands on Kyushu. At first, your troops demonstrate disciplined coordination. They use explosive bombs filled with gunpowder, weapons unfamiliar to many Japanese defenders. Shield walls and organized formations contrast with the samurai style of individual combat. The fighting is intense, but not decisive. And then the weather intervenes. A storm strikes. Ships are damaged. Supplies are strained. The fleet withdraws. It is not a total defeat, but it is not victory either. You interpret this not as a failure of strategy, but as an incomplete effort. So you try again. The second invasion in 1281 is even more ambitious. Two massive fleets, one from Korea, one from southern China, are meant to converge on Japan. The southern fleet alone is enormous, perhaps one of the largest naval forces assembled in the medieval world. Coordination proves difficult. The fleets do not merge as smoothly as planned. Weeks pass. The Japanese, this time prepared, build defensive fortifications along the coast. And once again, nature intervenes. A powerful typhoon tears through the anchored ships. Many vessels hastily constructed in southern China are not built for such conditions. Thousands of soldiers drown. Ships break apart. Japanese accounts later describe the storm as a divine protection, the kamikaze, or divine wind. For you, it is a catastrophic loss of resources. The failure does not topple your empire, but it strains finances and morale. Shipbuilding, troop mobilization, and supply lines have been expensive. The treasury feels the weight. Still, Japan is not the only frontier testing your reach. In Southeast Asia, the kingdoms of Dai Viet in northern Vietnam and Champa resist Mongol authority. You launch campaigns in the 1250s and again in the 1280s. On paper, these regions are smaller than China. In reality, they are far more difficult to subdue. The climate is humid. The terrain is dense with jungle. Rivers complicate movement. Guerrilla tactics replace open field battle. Supply lines stretch thin. Your armies capture capitals temporarily. Local rulers flee into forests and mountains. Disease spreads among troops unused to tropical conditions. Victory proves elusive. In 1288, at the Battle of Bac Dong River, Vietnamese forces use an ingenious tactic. They plant iron-tipped stakes beneath the water's surface. As your fleet advances with the tide, the ships move upriver successfully. But when the tide recedes, vessels become impaled on the hidden stakes. Vietnamese forces attack from small boats, setting ships ablaze. It is a sharp reminder that naval warfare in unfamiliar waters carries risks you cannot fully control. Eventually, Vietnam resumes tributary relations, but it retains autonomy. This is not direct annexation, it is negotiated distance. You also turn your attention toward Burma. The Pagan kingdom faces Mongol pressure in the 1270s and 1280s. After military campaigns, the kingdom collapses internally, though direct Mongol control remains limited. Instead, you establish influence through local rulers who acknowledge Yuan authority. Java becomes another ambitious target. In 1293, a Yuan expedition arrives intending to punish the Javanese king for insulting your envoys. The campaign initially succeeds in defeating a rival claimant, but political maneuvering leads your forces isolated. Tropical disease and logistical strain weaken the expedition, and it withdraws. These campaigns reveal something important. The Mongol military machine, so effective across steppe and open plains, meets its limits in maritime and jungle environments. Cavalry dominance does not translate perfectly to naval warfare. Rapid mobility doesn't function the same in monsoon climates. You adapt where you can. You rely heavily on Chinese shipbuilders and Korean sailors. You incorporate gunpowder weapons. You expand naval engineering. But adapting takes time, and time costs money. Meanwhile, within China, the demands of war ripple outward. Tax burdens increase. Labor is requisitioned for shipbuilding. Grain shipments support distant campaigns. Every failed invasion quietly erodes public confidence. And there are internal security concerns. Southern China, conquered only recently, still harbors lingering loyalty to the fallen Song dynasty. While large-scale rebellion does not immediately erupt, dissatisfaction simmers. The social hierarchy you established, placing Mongols and Semu above the majority Han population, continues to generate resentment. You cannot conquer sentiment as easily as territory. Yet, from your perspective, expansion is logical. A strong empire projects power. Tributary states reinforce legitimacy. Demonstrating military capability discourages rebellion elsewhere. And, despite setbacks, your core territories remain secure. The northern frontier is stable. Korea maintains its vassal relationship. Tibet remains closely tied to your court through religious bonds. Trade continues to flow. Daidu remains vibrant. The bureaucracy functions. But the financial strain accumulates slowly. Shipbuilding on the scale required for Japan was extraordinary. Some historical accounts suggest that southern Chinese shipyards were pushed to produce vessels rapidly, perhaps compromising structural integrity. Whether fully accurate or somewhat exaggerated, the logistical burden was undeniably immense. Paper currency issuance increases further to fund state expenditures. At first, markets absorb the additional notes. Over time, prices begin to rise. Inflation is not dramatic in a single year, it is gradual, but it quietly reduces purchasing power, complicating trade and taxation. You are aging now. Your reign has been long and transformative. You have ruled as Great Khan and as Emperor of China. You have overseen the first foreign dynasty to unify the entire country. You have overseen one of the most globally connected eras in pre-modern history. But the cost of ambition lingers in ledgers and shipwrecks. Your successors will inherit not only a vast empire, but also its debts, its resentments, and its structural tensions. The campaigns beyond China reveal both the strength and the limits of Mongol power. On land, across open terrain, the Mongol system remains formidable. Across seas and jungles, its dominance is less certain. By the time of your death in 1294, the Yuan Dynasty stands powerful but stretched. Its institutions are established, its global connections are unparalleled. Yet, the balance you constructed between Mongol identity and Chinese governance, between expansion and stability, requires careful maintenance. And maintenance is rarely as dramatic as conquest. The empire you leave behind is impressive, complex, and subtly strained. A structure that appears solid from a distance, but contains pressures that will slowly intensify in the decades ahead. When you died in 1294, the empire does not collapse. It simply exhales. You had been the center, politically, symbolically, personally. Your authority bridged Mongol aristocrats, Chinese bureaucrats, Central Asian financiers, and distant tributary states. You were not merely an emperor, you were the balance point. Remove the balance point, and subtle shifts begin. Your chosen successor is your grandson, Temur Khan, known posthumously as Emperor Changzong. He inherits a vast and functional state. The bureaucracy still operates, trade still flows, the capital remains stable. But succession in the Mongol world has never been entirely straightforward. Unlike rigid primogeniture systems in some monarchies, Mongol political tradition allows for broader claims within the royal family. Princes expect influence. Branches of the family maintain their own power bases. Loyalty is personal, not institutional. Temur secures the throne, but he must negotiate constantly with powerful Mongol nobles. He restores certain Confucian examinations that had been suspended, attempting to placate Chinese elites. He also tries to stabilize finances strained by your overseas campaigns. Yet the underlying structural issues remain. The empire is expensive. Maintaining the Yam postal system, the military garrisons, the court's elaborate expenditures, and the vast administrative network requires steady revenue. Inflation continues to trouble paper currency. Excessive issuance undercuts confidence. Attempts to reform the monetary system only partially succeed. And then there is factionalism. Court politics intensify. Mongol aristocratic factions compete for influence. Seimu officials, many of whom had gained significant financial authority under your reign, face resentment from both Mongol nobles and Chinese literati. Timur's reign is relatively stable, but it lacks your commanding presence. He governs more conservatively, focusing inward rather than outward. When he dies in 1307 without a clear heir, succession becomes turbulent. Kulug Khan, known as Emperor Wuzong, takes the throne after internal maneuvering. His reign is short and financially reckless. Lavish spending increases. Paper money is issued in large quantities. Inflation accelerates. You can almost see the strain in market stalls. Merchants quietly adjusting prices, peasants finding their currency worth less than it was the year before. After Wuzong's death in 1311, his brother Ayur Barwada, Emperor Renzong, ascends. He attempts reform. Confucian influence grows again at court. The civil service examination system is formally reinstated in 1315, restoring a traditional avenue for Chinese scholars to enter government. It is an important moment. For the first time under the Yuan, Confucian orthodoxy regains institutional legitimacy. This move helps stabilize relations with the educated elite, but it also shifts the balance slightly away from the Mongol first hierarchy that defined your original structure. The dynasty is slowly becoming more Chinese in governance, even as Mongol privilege remains intact. But succession disputes do not disappear. After Renzong, short reigns and political intrigue become more common. Emperor Yingzong attempts administrative reforms, but is assassinated in 1323 during a coup known as the Nanpo Incident. Court factions eliminate him in favor of a rival claimant. This is not an isolated tremor. It is a sign that imperial authority has weakened. Between 1328 and 1332, a full-scale civil war erupts between rival claimants, Tugtamur and Kusala, in what historians call the War of the Two Capitals. Forces loyal to different princes clash. The unity you once embodied now fractures into competing camps. Although one side ultimately prevails, the damage is done. Each succession crisis weakens central authority. Each coup reminds provincial officials that the throne is no longer unassailable. Meanwhile, nature begins to turn against the dynasty. The Yellow River, unpredictable and powerful, shifts course multiple times in the 14th century. Floods devastate farmland, irrigation systems fail, peasants lose crops. In Chinese political thought, natural disasters are never just natural. They are omens. The mandate of heaven, which legitimizes dynastic rule, is conditional. Floods, droughts, locusts, these are interpreted as heaven's dissatisfaction. The Yuan court attempts relief efforts, but corruption and logistical inefficiencies hamper distribution. Grain shipments are delayed, local officials siphon supplies. At the same time, population pressures and land concentration intensify rural hardship. Wealthy landowners expand estates, small farmers become tenants or laborers. Resentment grows quietly in villages far from Dadu. And then there is disease. The mid-14th century witnesses the spread of the Black Death across Eurasia. While its precise demographic impact within Yuan China remains debated, the interconnected trade networks that once symbolized prosperity now facilitate transmission of plague. Trade routes that carried silk and porcelain also carry illness. Urban centers suffer, economic activity slows, tax revenues decline. The treasury, already strained by inflation and administrative costs, struggles further. In this environment, religious movements gain traction. One such movement emerges from the White Lotus Society, blending Buddhist and millenarian beliefs. Its teachings promise renewal and the coming of a new age. For peasants burdened by taxes, floods, and uncertainty, such messages resonate. By the 1350s, rebellion begins to take organized form. The Red Turban Rebellion erupts across multiple regions of China. Rebel leaders use religious symbolism and anti-Mongol sentiment to rally support. They present the Yuan as foreign rulers who have lost heaven's favor. What began decades earlier as subtle structural strain now manifests as open revolt. Regional warlords rise, some claiming loyalty to the Yuan, others positioning themselves as alternatives. Among them is a former monk named Zhu Yuanzhang. At first, he is simply one leader among many, but he proves disciplined, strategic, and politically astute. He consolidates control in the south, builds alliances, and gradually strengthens his forces. Meanwhile, the Yuan court in Dadu faces internal paralysis. Factional disputes persist, financial instability continues, military responses to rebellion are inconsistent and sometimes ineffective. The Mongol elite remains powerful in the north, but their grip over southern provinces weakens steadily. By 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang's forces march northward. Dadu falls with relatively limited resistance. The last Yuan emperor in China, Togon Temur, flees north into the Mongolian steppe. The Ming Dynasty is proclaimed. Yet the Yuan do not entirely vanish. In Mongolia, the so-called Northern Yuan continues to claim legitimacy for decades. The imperial lineage survives, but it no longer rules China. What began as the first foreign dynasty to unify the entire country ends not in sudden annihilation, but in gradual erosion, political factionalism, fiscal instability, environmental disaster, social unrest, and rebellion converging over time. Looking back across the decades after your death, the pattern becomes clearer. Your reign balanced competing forces through personal authority and strategic compromise. Without that central figure, the delicate equilibrium faltered. The Mongols had conquered China through military brilliance. Governing it required administrative cohesion and sustained legitimacy. When those weakened, the vast structure you built proved vulnerable. The Yuan dynasty lasted less than a century in China, from 1271 to 1368.
Yet during that time, it reshaped Eurasian trade, formalized provincial governance structures, expanded maritime ambition, and demonstrated both the possibilities and limits of imperial integration across cultures. The empire you founded did not collapse overnight. It loosened, it strained, and eventually it yielded to a new dynasty arising from within the very society it once conquered.
You are no longer an emperor. You are not a general, nor a court official holding sealed decrees. You are simply living under the Yuan Dynasty. And daily life, far from the palace and Dadu, feels both familiar and subtly changed. If you are a peasant in the Yangtze River Valley, your day begins before sunrise. The land matters more to you than dynasties. Rice paddies must be tended whether the ruler is Song, Yuan, or something yet to come. You work fields that may have been in your family for generations, or perhaps you now rent them from a larger landowner. Under the Yuan, land concentration increases in many regions. Wealthy elites expand estates. Smaller farmers sometimes lose ownership and become tenant cultivators. Your tax obligations remain steady, though they may feel heavier. Grain must be delivered. Labor services may be required. In some areas, tax farming by appointed officials increases resentment, especially if collections exceed official quotas. Yet from your perspective, the Mongol emperor in distant Dadim is an abstract figure. What matters more is the local magistrate and whether he is fair. Agriculture remains the backbone of the empire. Rice dominates the south. Wheat and millet grow in the north. Tea plantations expand in certain regions. Cotton cultivation spreads gradually, though it will become more prominent in later centuries. Irrigation systems inherited from earlier dynasties still function, though floods of the Yellow River periodically undo careful planning. When riverbanks break, you feel the consequences immediately. Crops fail. Grain prices rise. Relief may or may not arrive in time. In good years, life is predictable. In bad years, it becomes precarious. If you move north to Dadu, life looks different. The capital is vast, one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Wide avenues divide neighborhoods into ordered grids. Markets hum with trade. Foreign merchants walk alongside Chinese craftsmen. You might live in a modest courtyard house with gray brick walls and a wooden gate. Inside, family life revolves around shared meals, ancestral rituals, and seasonal festivals that persist regardless of Mongol rule. Urban professions vary. You could be a silk weaver, working delicate threads into shimmering fabric, destined for elite wardrobes. You might be a potter, crafting porcelain influenced by Persian cobalt designs. You could be a metalworker, carpenter, papermaker, or printer. Printing remains a quiet revolution. Woodblock printing, already well established during the Song dynasty, continues under the Yuan. Books, calendars, religious texts, and plays circulate more widely than in many other parts of the medieval world. Literacy remains limited compared to modern standards, but urban centers sustain vibrant literary culture. Theater flourishes in particular. Under the Yuan, dramatic performances, especially Zaju plays, become immensely popular. Playwrights such as Guan Hung King compose works blending humor, social critique, romance, and moral lessons. You might attend a performance in a tea house, listening as actors sing and recite in stylized rhythms. For a few hours, politics fades into storytelling. If you are a merchant, the Yuan period can be prosperous. Trade networks stretch far beyond China's borders. You might deal in silk, ceramics, spices, tea, or precious metals. Paper currency simplifies transactions, at least in theory. The government requires its use, reinforcing circulation. In bustling ports like Quanzhou, maritime commerce thrives. Arab and Persian merchants maintain established communities. Mosques stand near Chinese temples. Ships depart regularly for Southeast Asia and India. You might never meet a Mongol noble directly, but you feel the effects of their empire in the safety of long-distance routes and the diversity of goods available in markets. If you are a woman living under Yuan rule, your experience depends heavily on class and region. Among Mongol elites, women traditionally hold relatively high status compared to many sedentary societies. Steppe culture values women's authority within households. Elite Mongol women sometimes manage estates, advise husbands, and maintain political influence. Within Chinese society, Confucian norms continue to shape gender roles. Women are expected to manage domestic life, maintain family harmony, and uphold virtue. Foot-binding, which had spread during the Song Dynasty, continues in many Han communities, though it is not practiced among Mongols. Marriage remains arranged in most cases. Dowries and family alliances matter deeply. For elite women, marriage can be a political tool. For rural women, it is more directly tied to economic survival and family continuity. Women work constantly, in fields, in homes, in textile production. Silk production in particular relies heavily on female labor, from raising silkworms to weaving fabric. Religious life also shapes daily rhythm. You might visit a Buddhist temple, burn incense and pray for prosperity. Taoist rituals mark seasonal cycles. Muslim communities observe Friday prayers. Nestorian Christians gather in modest churches. Religious diversity is visible, especially in urban centers. Under the Yuan, overt religious persecution is relatively rare compared to some earlier or later periods. The state favors Tibetan Buddhism at the highest level, but local practice remains varied. Festivals continue to structure time. The Lunar New Year arrives with family gatherings and offerings to ancestors. Lantern festivals illuminate streets and cities. Seasonal markets appear during major holidays. These traditions outlast dynasties. If you are part of the Mongol ruling class living in China, your life looks somewhat different. You maintain elements of steppe culture. Hunting expeditions remain important social and political rituals. Horse riding remains central to identity. You might spend summers in the grasslands near Shangdu, away from the dense urban environment of Dadu. Yet even you are changing. Your clothing may blend Mongol and Chinese styles. Your meals may include northern wheat noodles alongside steppe meats. Your children may learn Chinese administrative norms, even as they inherit Mongol lineage. Cultural blending occurs slowly, unevenly, sometimes reluctantly. The Yuan legal system reflects layered governance. Mongols may receive lighter punishments for certain offenses compared to Han Chinese subjects. Social hierarchy remains visible in law and taxation. This inequality fosters resentment, especially for educated elites who see themselves as heirs to a long Confucian tradition. But daily survival does not always revolve around ideology. It revolves around harvest cycles, business transactions, marriages, and family obligations. Even during periods of political instability in the capital, village life can appear steady until floods, famine, or rebellion disrupt that illusion. By the mid-14th century, as rebellion spreads, daily life grows more uncertain. Banditry increases in some regions. Tax demands persist even as harvests fail. Armed groups move through countryside areas. Yet before that final unraveling, decades of Yuan rule feel surprisingly ordinary to many subjects. Empires often appear dramatic in textbooks, conquests, invasions, decrees, but most people experience them through small details: the texture of paper money in hand, the price of rice in the market, the sound of foreign languages in the street, the sight of Mongol cavalry passing through town. Under the Yuan, you live in a world more connected than ever before. Goods arrive from distant lands. Religions coexist within the same city walls. Cultural influences blend quietly in art, fashion, and cuisine. You might never travel beyond your province, yet the empire reaches you anyway, through currency, through trade, through law, through stories. Daily life under the Yuan is not constant upheaval. It is routine, layered over complexity, familiarity shaped by foreign rule, continuity interwoven with subtle change. And in that ordinary rhythm, planting, weaving, trading, praying, the vast Mongol-founded dynasty sustains itself for nearly a century before larger forces begin to pull it apart. Under the Yuan, you are living in a world that feels both ancient and surprisingly modern. If you are a scholar, your day might begin with scrolls spread across a wooden desk, inkstone and brush ready. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering are not abstract ideas here. They are applied, debated, and recorded. You notice that the Yuan dynasty is not just about conquest, it is about connecting knowledge from all corners of Eurasia. Astronomy fascinates you. The court employs Muslim and Chinese astronomers alike. You study star charts, eclipse tables, and planetary movements. Instruments are imported from Central Asia, refined locally, and occasionally adapted to Chinese methods. Accurate calendars are essential. They dictate harvests, festivals, and taxation. Mistakes have real consequences. You realize that science under the Yuan is practical, tied directly to governance. Mathematics flourishes quietly. You might encounter algebraic techniques from Persia, applied to bookkeeping or astronomical calculations. You see how the Mongol preference for foreigners in certain posts accelerates the exchange of knowledge. A Persian mathematician at the court explains complex calculations that surprise even the most learned Chinese scholars. Numbers, it seems, travel faster than armies. Medicine is equally eclectic. Herbal manuals compiled during previous dynasties are combined with insights from Central Asia and the Middle East. You might witness a physician preparing remedies for the court, mixing traditional Chinese herbs with imported substances, cinnamon from the south, frankincense from the west, carefully measuring doses with copper balances. Public health remains rudimentary, but innovation is everywhere if you look closely. Technology quietly hums around you. You notice canals flowing steadily, connecting northern and southern regions. Paper currency circulates, printed with precision using woodblocks. Gunpowder weapons, first developed in the Tang and Song eras, are now refined for defensive use. Cast bronze cannons are tested under the careful supervision of engineers. Bridges, city walls, and palace architecture reflect sophisticated knowledge of materials, geometry, and structural forces. You understand that the Yuan urban planning is not haphazard. Daidu is laid out with intention, blending Mongol ideals of open space with Chinese grid patterns. Culture thrives quietly but pervasively. You might attend a zaju performance in the city theater, watching performers sing, recite, and enact plays that challenge social norms while entertaining audiences. Playwrights like Guanhun King craft stories that challenge social norms while entertaining audiences. Literature, poetry, and drama are no longer just elite pursuits. The urban population consumes them actively. Visual culture is a fusion. Ceramics from Jingdezhen show Persian motifs alongside traditional Chinese shapes. Scroll paintings depict both pastoral landscapes and courtly scenes, sometimes incorporating Mongol themes, horse riders on the steppe, hunting parties, and distant caravans. You realize that visual culture is both decorative and functional, a record of identity and influence. Religious diversity also shapes cultural life. Tibetan Buddhism holds favor at court, influencing rituals and artistic patronage. Taoist and Confucian traditions persist across the populace. Muslims, Nestorian Christians, and even some Jews maintain small communities. You walk through city streets and see mosques next to Taoist temples, incense drifting alongside the call to prayer. This coexistence, while not perfectly equal, creates a cosmopolitan ambiance rarely seen elsewhere in the medieval world. Printing accelerates literacy and knowledge diffusion. You might handle a printed almanac, a medical manual, or a collection of poetry. Paper allows ideas to circulate beyond elite families. Scholars from different regions read, compare, and debate. Knowledge is no longer confined to one city or court. Even engineering projects reflect innovation. You observe bridges spanning rivers, canal locks managing water flow, and watchtowers designed to signal messages across long distances. The Mongol preference for mobility and communication has pushed technical ingenuity. You realize that logistical mastery is as much science as it is administration. Maps also improve. Cartographers integrate information from travelers, merchants, and envoys. You might hold a map showing not only China, but the steppe, Central Asia, India, and maritime routes to Southeast Asia. The world is larger, more connected, and more precisely recorded than ever before. Yet daily life for most people remains quiet. Farmers still tend crops, merchants still barter goods, women still manage households. Science, technology, and culture often operate behind the scenes, subtle but influential. You might never witness a groundbreaking invention firsthand, but you experience its consequences in a functioning canal, in an accurate calendar, in a well-planned city. The Yuan Dynasty, for all its reputation as a foreign conqueror, becomes a conduit for knowledge and innovation. You see the blending of Chinese tradition, Mongol pragmatism, and global influence. Trade routes carry more than silk and spices. They carry ideas, techniques, and culture. By observing carefully, you understand that the empire's strength is not only its armies, but its ability to harness knowledge. Administration, engineering, astronomy, literature, and art all converge to create a civilization both practical and sophisticated. You live in a world that is ordinary in its routines, but extraordinary in its connections. And in that calm, everyday life, science, technology, and culture quietly shape the empire, leaving a legacy that endures long after the emperors and generals have faded from memory.
You wake up to the rhythm of commerce. Coins clink in marketplaces, paper money changes hands, horses trot along paved roads, ships creak at distant harbors. Trade under the Yuan Dynasty is not abstract. It reaches into every province, every city, every port. And you, whether a merchant, official, or simple observer, feel its pulse. Overland, the Silk Road hums with activity. Caravans of camels and mules carry silk, tea, and porcelain westward. Spices, glassware, and silver travel eastward. You watch as merchants from Central Asia, Persia, and even Europe negotiate deals in city squares, their languages mingling with Mandarin and Mongolian. The roads are safer than in previous centuries. The Pax Mongolica has stabilized long-distance travel. Banditry exists, of course, but it is a risk you can manage with careful planning and a sturdy escort. The empire itself is a massive economic engine. Grain from the fertile south feeds northern cities. Salt and iron move along canals and rivers. Taxes, often collected in kind, support the bureaucracy and military. You notice that even small towns have access to goods imported from distant provinces, whether silk from Suzhou or tea from Hangzhou. The Yuan administration carefully monitors these flows, using relay stations and postal routes to ensure both speed and security. Maritime trade complements overland routes. In ports like Quanzhou, Ningbo, and Hangzhou, ships from Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia dock quietly under the Yuan flag. You see large Chinese junks alongside foreign vessels, their crews unloading spices, textiles, and precious metals. Merchants maintain small communities near the harbors, mosques and temples standing side by side. The mingling of cultures is visible in clothing, cuisine, and language. Trade is not just about goods, it is about connections. Ideas, techniques, and culture travel with merchants. Paper currency, Chao, is central to the economy. You might handle a note yourself, amazed at its precision and weight. The Yuan government mandates its use, attempting to unify the monetary system across a vast empire. In theory, it makes transactions easier. In practice, overissuance causes inflation. Prices rise quietly over decades, and you notice that a stable coin today buys less than it did a year ago. Still, the system is innovative and widely used, a reflection of the Yuan ambition to govern through bureaucracy and commerce rather than mere tribute. Markets in cities and towns reflect a layered economy. Small merchants trade local products like pottery, textiles, and foodstuffs. Larger merchants coordinate caravans or ships, moving commodities across provinces or overseas. You notice that banking practices develop quietly. Letters of credit, early bills of exchange, and partnerships allow for long-distance trade without physically moving vast quantities of silver or coins. These mechanisms are subtle but effective, letting trade flourish even across thousands of miles. Foreign merchants enjoy privileges under the Yuan. Central Asian and Middle Eastern traders, known collectively as semu, often gain access to markets, official permits, and favorable tax treatment. You might observe a Persian merchant negotiating for silk, spices, and porcelain, confident in the legal protection the state provides. This inclusion promotes both commerce and cultural exchange. You see not just wealth changing hands, but ideas, religions, and artistic influences traveling alongside goods. Within cities, guilds and craft organizations regulate production. Artisans maintain standards for ceramics, textiles, metalwork, and paper. You might visit a workshop and notice a sign indicating membership in a guild, a subtle mark of quality and prestige. Commerce is regulated not only by the government, but by networks of professionals ensuring that products maintain value. Taxes, of course, remain a constant backdrop. You witness collectors moving quietly through villages, recording grain, silk, or labor contributions. At the provincial level, tax revenue supports shipbuilding, military garrisons, and infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and canals facilitate trade, but they require maintenance. You see that the empire's wealth is a cycle. Harvests fund taxes, taxes fund infrastructure, infrastructure supports trade, trade produces wealth, and wealth funds the administration. International diplomacy intersects with commerce. Yuan envoys travel westward to Persia, India, and even Europe, sometimes in pursuit of trade, sometimes to negotiate alliances. You might observe letters, gifts, and envoys moving along caravan routes, carrying both goods and information. The world feels smaller because connections are faster, safer, and more regular. Goods are tangible, but influence moves almost as quickly. Cultural exchange flows naturally from trade. You notice Persian patterns appearing on Chinese textiles, Arabic script decorating porcelain, and musical instruments from Central Asia playing quietly in urban streets. Food, fashion, and art all carry subtle marks of distant lands. Trade is not simply an economic phenomenon, it shapes daily life, aesthetics, and social norms. Yet not all trade is seamless. Weather, piracy, and political tensions sometimes interrupt routes. Storms at sea or floods along rivers can destroy shipments. Prices fluctuate quietly. You notice these disruptions, small ripples in an otherwise vast and interconnected system. They remind you that even an empire as large as the Yuan cannot fully control the natural world. By the mid-14th century, you see that commerce, administration, and diplomacy are deeply intertwined. The empire's ability to move goods, money, and people across continents is a testament to organization, innovation, and vision. Every market, every caravan, every ship reflects the Yuan capacity to integrate a diverse world. You realize that the empire's strength is as much economic as military. Armies win battles, but trade sustains cities, funds bureaucracies, and connects peoples. You experience daily life enriched by these networks, merchants selling foreign spices, artisans crafting exotic designs, scholars reading imported texts. Under the Yuan, the world is larger and smaller at once. Distances shrink through trade. Ideas travel faster than armies. You feel the pulse of an interconnected Eurasian network, a silent web of wealth, knowledge, and influence that stretches from China's northern grasslands to the ports of India, Persia, and beyond. And then observing it, you understand. Trade is not merely survival or profit, it is civilization itself, quietly building the foundation for the empire's legacy, and for the world that will follow long after the Mongol banners have faded.
The Yuan Dynasty fades, but its echoes remain everywhere you look. You have seen emperors come and go, armies march and retreat, markets bustle and scholars debate. You have traveled roads, crossed rivers, and observed cities both grand and modest. And now, as the empire loosens its grip, you notice something remarkable. The world it's shaped does not vanish with banners and crowns. Politically, the Yuan establishes a blueprint for governing a vast, multicultural empire. You notice administrative divisions and provinces stretching across mountains, rivers, and steppe. The empire relied on local officials, diverse ethnic administrators, and a complex bureaucracy that balances Mongol authority with Chinese institutional practices. Later dynasties will adapt, and refine these systems. You see that the Yuan experiment proves that governing a vast, diverse land is possible, even if difficult. Culturally, the empire blends worlds. You remember walking through Dadu and Quanzhou, seeing Persian merchants next to Chinese silk traders, hearing Arabic, Mongolian, and Mandarin mingling in the streets. You realize that cities under the Yuan are laboratories of cosmopolitanism. Art, music, literature, and theater reflect this fusion. Porcelain with Persian designs, Zaju plays addressing universal human themes, architecture that mixes steppe practicality with Chinese elegance. The Mongol court sponsors Tibetan Buddhist rituals, yet Confucian scholars still debate moral philosophy. You notice that cultural hybridity becomes part of everyday life. Economically, the Yuan dynasty connects continents. The Silk Road hums with camels, while ships ply coastal waters to Southeast Asia and India. Paper money circulates, canals link north and south, and markets in distant provinces share both goods and ideas. You see that trade is not just local, it is global. Ideas, religions, techniques, and artistic motifs travel alongside silk, tea, and spices. You understand that the Yuan Dynasty, more than any previous Chinese dynasty, turns China into a hub of Eurasian commerce. In technological terms, you observe subtle revolutions. Printing, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering advance quietly. Calendars grow more accurate, star charts integrate knowledge from the Middle East, and bridges, canals, and urban layouts display careful planning. You notice that inventions are not just for show, they serve daily life, governance, and trade. Knowledge circulates, travels, and endures. Socially, you realize that life under the Yuan demonstrates both continuity and change. Peasants work fields much as they did before. Merchants buy and sell, and women manage households, yet subtle shifts occur. Mongol influence reaches the elite. Foreign merchants gain privileges, and urban centers become more diverse. Daily life is ordinary, yet enriched by extraordinary connections. Even after the dynasty falls in China proper, the Mongols retain the steppe north of the Great Wall as the Northern Yuan. They maintain lineage, culture, and political identity. You witness that while political control in China ends, the people, practices, and ideas the Yuan shaped persist. Its legacy is diffuse, embedded in administration, culture, trade, and society. The Yuan dynasty teaches you an important lesson. Empires are more than armies and conquests. They are networks of people, ideas, economies, and culture. They succeed when they integrate, and they falter when integration weakens. And even in decline, their influence ripples through centuries, quietly shaping the world you inhabit. When you look back across decades, you see the full picture. The Mongols conquered with speed and power, but they ruled by connection. They united steppe and sedentary, east and west, trade and scholarship. They created a world simultaneously vast and intimate, dangerous yet orderly, foreign yet deeply intertwined with the land they governed. You feel it in marketplaces, in canals, in the words of scholars and poets, in the melodies of theater and song. You feel it in the cities, the temples, the roads, and the distant caravans. The Yuan dynasty is gone, yet everywhere traces remain. A bridge that still spans a river, a zaju play that is still read, a map that inspires travelers, a canal that moves grain, a lesson that endures. And in that quiet continuity, you understand, the empire you witnessed is not measured only in years or battles, but in the ways it shaped the daily rhythms, connections, and knowledge of generations to come.